The heart of a Montana blizzard ripped across Highway 2, turning the world white. Cars buried beneath ice and snow, abandoned by drivers fleeing toward distant gas stations and motels. The wind howled like something alive, hungry, searching for anyone foolish enough to challenge its dominance. In this fury of nature, a battered Ford pickup truck with 200,000 miles on the odometer crawled along at a cautious pace, high beams barely cutting through the whiteout. Jack Miller gripped the steering wheel with calloused hands, leaning forwards as if those few inches might help him see better. 40 minutes late already to pick up Emily from her after-school program. The second time this week. His phone had no signal, typical for this stretch of road even in good weather. Emily would understand, she always did. Too understanding for a 7-year-old. That thought twisted in his chest like a knife. Through the passenger window, a weak pulse of amber light caught his attention. Hazard lights barely visible through the storm. Every instinct told him to keep driving, get to Emily, get home safe. But his foot found the brake pedal instead. Old habits from a different life when he'd been the guy who ran toward trouble while others ran away. The SUV had spun off the road, its front end buried in a snowbank, driver's side door crumpled like aluminum foil. Expensive model all-wheel drive with every electronic safety feature that money could buy. Worth nothing against Montana ice and wind. Jack's headlights illuminated the interior just enough to see a woman slumped against the deployed airbag. A trickle of blood above her eye caught the light. Jack pulled his collar tight against the wind and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath. His toolbox from the bed of the truck yielded a pry bar. Wedging it into the doorframe, he put his weight against it, muscles burning as the metal groaned and gave way. The woman's seatbelt had locked, trapping her against the seat. Jack pulled the folding knife from his pocket, sawing through the nylon strap, catching her as she slumped forward. 2 fingers pressed to her neck, found a pulse steady but weak. She was breathing. That was enough. He stripped off his red flannel coat, the one Emily had picked out at the thrift store because it looks like fire, Daddy, and wrapped it around the unconscious woman. The fabric was warm from his body heat as he tucked it around her shoulders before lifting her in both arms. The abandoned hunting cabin sat 200 yards off the highway down a trail only locals knew. Jack had passed it 1,000 times, never needed it until now. He kicked the door open with his boot, carried the woman inside, and laid her gently on the floor near the stone fireplace. The temperature inside wasn't much better than outside, but at least they were out of the wind. Jack worked quickly, finding dry alcohol tablets in his emergency kit to start a fire. Old newspapers someone had left behind fed the flames. Within minutes, orange light flickered across rough-hewn walls, and heat began pushing back the cold. The woman stirred, eyelids fluttering. Her first instinct was control hand moving to check for her phone, her bag, her files. But none of that was here. Just firelight, a stranger, and the sound of wind trying to tear the world apart outside. Your name? Her voice came out raspy, damaged by cold and shock. The question carried an expectation of answers, not a request. Jack Miller. She studied him through the haze of pain and confusion, making calculations he couldn't read. I'm Sarah. Just Sarah, no last name offered. That simple omission changed everything and nothing. Jack noticed her wrist swelling already, the joint at an angle that made him wince. He found a straight piece of wood from the kindling pile, tore strips from an old blanket, and fashioned a splint with the kind of improvisation that came from years of making broken things work. His hands were gentle, despite their roughness, and Sarah found herself watching those hands more than his face. You have someone waiting for you, Jack asked, feeding another log to the fire. Sarah almost laughed. Waiting, as if anyone in her life operated on something as quaint as waiting. No, you. My daughter, she's 7, obsessed with wind turbines. The pride in Jack's voice was unmistakable, cutting through the practiced neutrality. Builds them out of scrap parts. Says she's going to power the whole valley someday. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest, just a hairline fracture easy to ignore. When was the last time someone had spoken to her about dreams instead of deliverables? She turned her face toward the fire, hiding whatever expression had escaped her control. The wrist splint held. The fire burned steady. Outside, the storm raged like it had personal grievances against Montana. The cabin became its own small world firelight, the only thing standing between them and the consuming dark. Sarah hated this, hated the loss of control, hated depending on a stranger. Every instinct screamed to take charge, establish dominance, create structure. But here in this primitive space, those instincts had no purchase. We should wait for dawn before trying the highway, Jack said. It wasn't a suggestion, just a statement of fact delivered without authority, which somehow made it more convincing. Sarah wanted to argue, but the wind howling through cracks in the walls made the point moot. In my world, efficiency determines who stays. The words fell from her mouth before she could stop them. Jack poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. In my world, everyone deserves to get home. The words hung between them, simple and devastating. Sarah thought of her father, Chairman George Reynolds, who told her leadership meant being willing to be cold, meant making decisions others were too weak to make. She'd built her career on that principle, worn it like armor. But here, watching this stranger tend to fire to keep her alive, the armor felt thin. When the flames began to die, Jack pulled something from his pocket, a hand warmer made from a Ziploc bag filled with salt solution and a heat pack. Improvised, imperfect, and exactly what she needed. He placed it against her good hand, and Sarah stared at his calloused palms. These hands that fixed things, that saved things, that knew how to be useful without seeking credit. In the firelight, she saw safety, the kind money couldn't purchase. And for just a moment, she let herself feel it. Jack had a notebook in his truck, grabbed it when he'd retrieved the emergency kit. Old habits from his engineering days meant he still sketched systems, still thought in diagrams. While Sarah dozed fitfully, he flipped through pages of generator schematics for the Sterling Dynamics plant, where he worked night's notes about aging safety valves, observations about equipment that should have been replaced 3 budgets ago. One notation stood out, written in his precise hand. Safety valve C7 installed 1983, past service life. Recommend replacement before winter load increase. He'd submitted that recommendation 4 months ago. It had vanished into the bureaucratic void. Probably died on someone's desk. Probably got filed under not urgent enough to fund. Dawn came slowly, gray light filtering through gaps in the cabin walls. The storm had exhausted itself sometime in the dark hours, leaving behind a world buried under 2 feet of fresh snow. Search and rescue vehicles appeared on the highway, their lights cutting through the morning gloom. Sarah sat up, winced at the pain in her wrist, felt the red flannel coat slide from her shoulders. She'd slept in a stranger's jacket, in a stranger's protection, and that vulnerability felt more dangerous than the storm had been. "I owe you," she said, standing with effort. Jack shook his head, already gathering their meager supplies. "Just stay warm another night." The rescue team loaded Sarah into their vehicle. Someone draped an emergency blanket over her shoulders, but she kept the red flannel coat close, couldn't quite bring herself to return it yet. Through the rear window, she watched Jack climb back into his ancient pickup, watched him drive toward town, toward his daughter, toward a life she couldn't imagine living. She didn't know his last name, didn't know what he did or where he worked. For a few hours, she'd just been Sarah, and he'd just been Jack. And that simplicity felt like something precious she'd lost long ago. Jack made it to Emily's school an hour after classes had ended. He found her in the empty classroom with Mrs. Patel, who'd stayed late despite having her own family waiting. Emily's eyes lit up when she saw him, then narrowed with that look of premature concern that always broke his heart. "You got stuck in the storm," she said, not a question, but a statement of fact. Her small fingers continued moving across the contraption on her desk, a miniature wind turbine built from popsicle sticks, bottle caps, and what looked like parts from a broken toy car. Jack knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. "I did. Had to help someone whose car went off the road." He wanted to apologize, but Emily had told him once in that matter-of-fact way she had inherited from her mother that he apologized too much for things that weren't his fault. Did they get home safe? Emily pushed a strand of dark hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear, with the unconscious grace that made her look so much like Kate, it sometimes stole his breath. "I think so. They got found by the rescue team." Emily nodded, satisfied with this answer. Then she held up her creation. "It's a variable pitch turbine. Mrs. Patel showed me on the computer how the blades can turn to catch different wind speeds." Jack's chest swelled with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. "That's my girl." Mrs. Patel smiled as she gathered her things. "She's entered it in the science fair next week. I think she has a real shot at first place." On the drive home, Emily chattered about gear ratios and wind resistance concepts she should have been too young to understand, but somehow grasped intuitively. Jack listened, asking questions in the right places, all while part of his mind kept returning to the woman in the SUV. Sarah. Something about her had seemed familiar, though he couldn't place it. Their trailer sat at the far end of Pinewood Mobile Home Park, where rent was cheap and dignity was hard-won. Small but immaculate with flower boxes Emily had insisted on planting in the windows defiant splashes of color against the gray Montana landscape. Inside the space was warm with the lingering smell of the morning's oatmeal. Jack had woken at 4:30 a.m., as he did every day, to make breakfast before his package delivery shift started. The night shift at Sterling Dynamics began at 11 p.m., which left him a few precious hours with Emily in the evening. Emily headed straight for the kitchen table, which doubled as her workshop. Jack moved to the refrigerator, mentally calculating what he could make with the remaining groceries. Payday was still 3 days away. "Did you take your medicine this morning?" Jack asked, keeping his voice casual, not wanting to worry her. Emily nodded without looking up from her project. "Mrs. Roberts watched me take it at lunch, too. I put a star on my chart." The medication chart hung on the refrigerator door, rows of gold star stickers marking days of compliance. The preventative treatments weren't cheap, even with insurance, but Jack would have worked a third job if that's what it took. Kate's cancer hadn't shown symptoms until it was too late. Emily carried the same genetic markers. Jack wouldn't make the same mistake twice, wouldn't be too busy climbing a career ladder to notice the signs. As he prepared a simple dinner of pasta and the last of the frozen vegetables, Jack's mind drifted to the notebook in his truck. The safety valve concerns had gone unaddressed for too long. He'd raise it again tonight with Frank Thompson, the plant manager. Frank was old school, understood that maintenance wasn't just a budget item, but the thing keeping catastrophe at bay. Sterling Dynamics manufactured critical components for the aerospace industry. 3 production lines ran around the clock, feeding parts to manufacturers across 3 continents. The Montana plant had been built in the 1970s during a tax incentive program designed to bring jobs to rural America. Now it stood as the economic backbone of Ridgemont, employing nearly 1,000 people in a town of just over 12,000. Jack had once been more than a night shift mechanic. 8 years at Boeing as an aviation maintenance engineer, rising quickly through the ranks. A corner office had been on the horizon. Then Kate got sick, declining rapidly over 6 terrifying months. After her death, Jack couldn't bear the sympathy in his colleagues' eyes. Couldn't stand the empty apartment in Seattle. Couldn't face the career that had consumed so many hours he might have spent with his wife. So he'd packed up their daughter and what remained of their life, moved back to his hometown of Ridgemont, taken the first jobs he could find. Started over with nothing but the determination to be there for Emily in a way he hadn't been for Kate. Emily finished her dinner and disappeared into her small bedroom to change into pajamas, a nightly ritual that always gave Jack precisely 4 minutes and 30 seconds of solitude. He used it to close his eyes, leaning against the kitchen counter, allowing himself to feel the bone-deep exhaustion that he kept carefully hidden from his daughter. The phone rang, jolting him back to alertness. The display showed Sterling Dynamics. Unusual for them to call before his shift. "Jack Miller. Jack, it's Jennifer from HR. We need all supervisors and department leads in conference room B tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. The CEO is doing an inspection tour." Jack frowned, checking the calendar on the wall. "I'm night shift. That's my sleep time. I know, and I'm sorry. But this comes from the top. All senior staff and department representatives are required. The CEO wants to evaluate operations across all shifts." Jack had never met the CEO, had only seen Sarah Reynolds in company newsletters. Professional headshots that made her look untouchable, captions touting her Harvard MBA and strategic vision. Rumors had been circulating about restructuring, about the Montana plant's aging infrastructure, making it a liability rather than an asset. "Fine, I'll be there." After hanging up, Jack called Mrs. Patel, arranging for Emily to go home with her after school tomorrow. Another favor he'd have to repay. Another disruption to Emily's routine. He hated it but didn't see any alternative. Emily emerged from her room wearing mismatched pajamas, polka dot pants, and a faded t-shirt with "My dad is a superhero" printed across the front. A birthday gift from 3 years ago that she refused to retire despite having outgrown it. Jack felt that familiar twist in his heart, pride and pain so intertwined, he couldn't separate them anymore. Story time. Emily climbed onto the couch, already reaching for the battered copy of The Wind in the Willows they'd been working through for the past month. Jack settled beside her, opening to the bookmark page. Emily leaned against him, small and warm and trusting. This was the best part of his day, these quiet moments, when the world narrowed to just the two of them and whatever adventure waited within the pages. He read until her eyes grew heavy, until her breathing deepened, carried her to bed, and tucked the blankets around her with the same care he'd shown the woman in the SUV. Stood watching her sleep for longer than he should have, memorizing the peaceful expression he worked so hard to protect. Then he changed into his work coveralls, left a note for Mrs. Roberts, who would arrive at 10:30 p.m. to stay with Emily overnight, and headed to the plant for his shift. The notebook with his safety concerns rode in the passenger seat, dog-eared and worn from too many consultations. Sterling Dynamics rose from the Montana plain like something alien, all steel and concrete, and high-fencing security lights, casting the surrounding area in harsh white illumination. 3 shifts 24 hours a day, the heartbeat of Ridgemont's economy. Jack badged in through the employee entrance, nodding to the security guard who knew him by name. The night crew was already assembling in the break room, men and women with lunch pails and tired eyes. People who worked while the world slept, making parts for airplanes most of them would never fly in. Jack poured himself cheap coffee from the communal pot. He taped Emily's latest drawing to his locker, a crayon depiction of a fireplace, with the words she loved scrawled beneath it, "Warm beats storm." Frank Thompson appeared in the doorway looking more harried than usual. His gray hair stood up in tufts as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. Miller got a minute. They stepped into Frank's cramped office walls covered with schematics and safety certifications. Frank didn't waste time on pleasantries. Word is the CEO visit tomorrow is about cuts. Deep ones. Jack's stomach tightened. How deep? Frank's weathered face creased with worry. 11th percentile reduction in workforce, according to my source in corporate. Focused mainly on maintenance and what they're calling legacy support staff. Legacy. Corporate speak for older workers with institutional knowledge too valuable to measure on a spreadsheet. People like Frank, like many of Jack's night shift colleagues. That's insane. This equipment is 40 years old. It needs experienced eyes on it. Frank nodded grimly. I've made that argument. Was told that modern diagnostic systems make legacy staffing levels unnecessary. He practically spat the word legacy. Tell that to valve C7 when it blows because some algorithm doesn't recognize the warning signs. Jack pulled his notebook from his pocket, flipped to the page about the valve. I've documented everything, submitted 3 formal recommendations since August. Keep that documentation handy for tomorrow. Reynolds will be looking for justifications, not objections. But maybe actual data might make a difference. Jack doubted it. In his experience, executives saw data as something to manipulate, not something to learn from. But he nodded anyway, not wanting to dampen Frank's already dim hopes. The shift passed with the usual rhythm of maintenance checks, minor repairs, and documentation. Jack moved through the cavernous production areas with the efficiency of someone who knew every inch of the space. His team of 3, Miguel, Darius, and Way, spread out to cover their assigned sections, communicating by radio when necessary. 4 hours into the shift, a pressure warning light flashed on the main hydraulic system for production line 2. Jack traced the issue to a leaking fitting on a coolant line. The proper procedure would be to shut down the line, call the vendor service team, wait 3 days for them to arrive, then pay $2,400 for a repair. He could do himself in 20 minutes. Jack radioed Frank. Got a Class 2 leak on the hydraulic coolant. I can fix it now with a compression clamp from inventory, or we can follow protocol. Frank's response came through with a burst of static. What's production look like tonight? We're running 94% efficiency, 7 units ahead of quota. A pause. Fix it yourself. I'll sign off on the parts requisition. Jack retrieved a spare compression clamp from the parts cage, making sure to log it properly in the inventory system. The repair took 18 minutes, most of that time spent ensuring the seal would hold under pressure. When he finished, the leak had stopped completely. Production line 2 never slowed. He was documenting the repair when his phone vibrated. Text message from Mrs. Roberts. Emily woke up asking for you. Bad dream. She's back asleep now. A stab of guilt pierced him. He should be there. Should be the one comforting his daughter after nightmares. But instead, he was here, keeping machines running so other people's children could have what they needed. In the quiet hours before dawn, Jack found himself standing at the observation window overlooking the production floor, watching robots perform the same precise movements they'd been programmed to execute thousands of times before. Flawless, efficient, uncomplaining. Exactly what modern management wanted from its human workforce, too. His reflection in the glass looked older than his 36 years. The hard angles of his face thrown into sharp relief by the industrial lighting, the shadow of stubble on his jaw, the permanent groove between his eyebrows from concentrating on broken things for too long. What would Kate think of what they'd become? Of the life he'd cobbled together from the wreckage of their plans? She'd wanted him to reach his potential, had pushed him toward advancement, even when it meant longer hours. Now he'd stepped off that ladder entirely, traded ambition for presence. Sometimes he wondered if he'd made the right choice. But then he thought of Emily, of being there to help with homework, to make breakfast, to comfort her after nightmares. What good was success if you weren't there for the people who mattered? The night shift ended at 7 a.m. Jack handed over to the day crew, briefing them on the repairs made and issues still pending. Then he drove home, arriving just as Mrs. Roberts was helping Emily get ready for school. Jack paid Mrs. Roberts, thanking her for the overnight stay. Emily bounded over for a hug backpack already on wind turbine model, carefully packed in a shoebox for show and tell. "You have bags under your eyes, Daddy," she observed, touching his face with gentle fingers. "Just tired, Em. Nothing some coffee won't fix." She fixed him with a look too serious for her years. "You need a nap. Mrs. Patel says sleep is when your body heals itself." Jack smiled despite his exhaustion. "I'll nap after my meeting, promise. But first I get to walk you to the bus stop." They walked hand in hand down the gravel road that ran through the mobile home park, Emily pointing out every interesting rock and cloud formation along the way. The school bus arrived precisely on schedule, as it did every morning. Jack watched her climb aboard, waving until the bus disappeared around the bend. Back home, he showered away the grime of the night shift, changed into clean clothes. Not quite a suit, but presentable enough for a meeting with corporate. The best shirt he owned, pressed khakis work boots, polished as much as their worn leather would allow. The notebook with his safety documentation tucked securely in his pocket. Sleep tugged at him, but Jack resisted. Instead, he reviewed his notes one more time, trying to articulate the concerns in language executives might actually hear. Not just the technical details, but the implications. Not just the costs of replacement, but the costs of failure. The drive to Sterling Dynamics took 12 minutes in daylight traffic. Jack arrived at 9:15, early enough to gather his thoughts, but not so early as to appear anxious. The parking lot contained several vehicles he didn't recognize, expensive sedans and SUVs with rental company logos, out-of-state plates. Corporate visitors. Conference room B already hummed with nervous energy when Jack entered. Day shift supervisors stood in awkward clusters, uncertain whether to sit or stand. Department heads checked phones and shuffled papers, projecting confidence they didn't feel. Jack recognized the defensive postures, the forced smiles. Everyone knew what was coming. No one wanted to acknowledge it. Robert Hayes, the chief operating officer, stood at the head of the table arranging presentation materials. His tailored suit and manicured appearance contrasted sharply with the plant personnel. Hayes had visited the Montana facility exactly twice in the 3 years Jack had worked there, both times to announce cost-cutting measures. Frank caught Jack's eye across the room, gave an almost imperceptible nod toward Hayes. The message was clear: the enemy has arrived. At precisely 9:30, the door opened. Conversation halted as Sarah Reynolds walked in, wearing a burgundy business suit, hair pulled into a severe bun, eyes like winter ice. The room stood. Jack felt the floor tilt beneath him. The woman from the SUV, the woman he'd pulled from the wreckage, carried through the snow, sheltered through the night. The woman who'd kept his flannel coat. Sarah's gaze swept the assembled faces, professional and detached, until it landed on Jack. For half a heartbeat, something flickered in her expression, shock and recognition, and something else. But then it was gone, replaced by the mask she wore like a second skin. "Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Let's begin." No acknowledgement, no indication they'd ever met. Jack shouldn't have been surprised. Of course she wouldn't admit to weakness in front of her subordinates. Of course she would maintain the professional distance her position required. Still, it stung in a way he hadn't expected. Robert Hayes launched into his presentation, spreadsheets projected on the wall charts, showing labor costs in angry red. William Green, the chief financial officer, emphasized overtime expenditures, talked about burning money on redundant coverage. The night shift, he explained with clinical precision, was where inefficiency lived. A document flashed on screen, too quick for most to read, But Jack caught his own name scrolling past. Phase 1 reduction targets. The header read. His stomach went cold. Frank pushed back from his chair, the legs screeching against the floor. You cut maintenance, you're gambling with safety. This equipment is 40 years old, needs experienced eyes on it. Equipment has diagnostic systems, Hayes countered smoothly. We can't justify legacy staffing based on outdated protocols. Jack studied Sarah during this exchange. Her right wrist was wrapped in a professional-looking brace, hidden partially by the sleeve of her jacket. On her notepad, she'd written something, then crossed it out. Her pen hovered over the page, uncertain. Last night's storm caused several minor accidents on Highway 2. Hayes continued, including Ms. Reynolds' vehicle, but she's fine and eager to proceed with our scheduled inspection. Sarah's eyes flashed to Jack for the briefest moment, then back to her notes. The inspection tour began immediately after the meeting with Sarah, moving through the plant like a general reviewing troops. Clipboard checklist questions delivered in rapid-fire succession. Jack had been assigned to assist with the technical portion of the tour, answering questions about maintenance procedures and equipment specifications. He kept his responses short, professional, accurate. When she asked about hydraulic pressure tolerances, he gave her exact numbers. When she questioned maintenance intervals, he cited the manual from memory. Neither of them acknowledged their previous encounter. The elephantine secret stood between them, invisible to everyone else, but impossible for them to ignore. They reached Sector 7, where Jack had noted the problematic safety valve. The C7 valve regulated pressure for the waistline in the casting sector, a critical component installed during the original plant construction. According to the maintenance record, it had been scheduled for replacement 3 years ago, then deferred when budgets tightened. Hayes hovered nearby, interjecting comments about optimized maintenance schedules and risk-adjusted priorities. His smile never reached his eyes, especially when he looked at Jack. Then they reached the area where Jack had repaired the coolant line the night before. The vendor quote for repair sat on someone's desk, still pending approval. 3 weeks old. What happened here? Sarah asked, noting the compression clamp. Before Hayes could answer, Jack spoke. Coolant line was weeping fluid. Would have taken the vendor 3 days to arrive. I fixed it with a standard compression clamp. Why didn't you call the vendor? Sarah's voice was neutral, but her eyes had sharpened. Because we could fix it ourselves in 20 minutes. Jack wiped his hands on a rag, saved about $2,400 and 3 days of downtime. Hayes appeared from nowhere, a shark-smelling blood. He improvised. Bypassed proper procurement channels. Sarah turned to Jack. Write up your method. Include safety verification. On my desk by end of shift. Jack nodded, walked away to find paper. He wrote by hand, clear block letters. Each step documented with the kind of precision that came from understanding that details mattered, that someone's life might depend on following the process correctly. The report was thorough, professional, and undeniably competent. His phone rang during the write-up. Emily's teacher. His heart rate spiked. Bad news came on phone calls during the day. Mr. Miller, Mrs. Patel's voice carried an unusual excitement. I wanted you to be the first to know. Emily won first place in the science fair. The judges were amazed by her wind turbine design. They're recommending her for the regional competition next month. Pride flooded through him, pure and bright. That's amazing. Thank you for letting me know. Is she there? Can I talk to her? She's in music class right now, but she'll be out in 20 minutes. She doesn't know yet. I wanted to surprise her. Jack thanked the teacher again, his voice thick with emotion. When he hung up, he realized Sarah was nearby, close enough to have overheard, close enough to see his face transform. For just a second, the ice in her expression melted. Then she rebuilt it brick by brick because CEOs didn't get distracted by employees' personal victories. But she'd seen it, and she couldn't unsee it. The inspection continued through the afternoon. Jack grew increasingly aware of the burning behind his eyes, the heaviness in his limbs. 20 hours without sleep was pushing his limits. But he couldn't afford to show weakness, not with his name on a reduction list. The gas line in the casting sector had been problematic for weeks. Pressure sensors throwing intermittent warnings that maintenance logged but couldn't replicate. The vendor had provided budget sensors approved by Hayes himself as a cost-saving measure. They worked 98% of the time. The other 2%, they lied. At 2:15 in the afternoon, while the day shift hummed with normal production noise, the sensor reported, all clear. The pressure gauge told a different story, but the gauge was old analog, the kind of thing people had learned to mistrust in favor of digital readouts. Hayes stood in the observation booth watching production numbers climb. "Don't stop the line," he told the floor supervisor. "We're losing $120,000 per hour when we're down." Safety valve C7 installed in 1983 began to whistle. Just a small sound easily missed under the industrial din. But Jack heard at that particular pitch that meant pressure building where it shouldn't. He hit the emergency stop, pulled the alarm that shut down the casting line. Red lights flashed, and a siren wailed across the plant floor. Hayes's voice exploded through the radio. "Who authorized that shutdown?" "Valve is critical," Jack shouted back. "We need to evacuate Sector 7 now." The explosion wasn't large, not by industrial standards. Just a pressure release. A burst of flame, white smoke billowing across the sector. But it was enough. Equipment worth $600,000 sat in the blast radius. More importantly, 12 people worked in that space. Jack grabbed a soaked blanket from the safety station, held it over his head, and ran toward the smoke. Through the haze, he saw Sarah frozen in the observation corridor, too close to the rupture. She was staring at the flames with the blank expression of someone watching their theories incinerate in real time. He reached her, wrapped the blanket around them both, pulled her toward the exit. His arms seared where a spark had caught him, but he didn't let go. They stumbled into clear air. Sarah coughing, Jack's lungs burning. Her temporary office was nearby. The red flannel coat still hung where she'd left it, incongruous against the corporate sterility. In the medical bay, Sarah's hands shook as she poured water for Jack. He sat on the examination table, shirt off, burn gel on his forearm. He tried to make a joke. Coffee would be better. She didn't laugh. "Why do you keep saving me?" Jack looked at her directly. "No difference, no calculation. Because you're a person." Something in Sarah's carefully constructed worldview cracked wide open. All her theories about efficiency, about metrics, about who deserved what, they scattered like ash in wind. This man, this night shift mechanic, who should have been a line on a termination list, had just risked his life for hers. And he'd done it without hesitation, without expecting reward, without even thinking about it. The emergency board meeting convened within the hour, executives dialing in from 3 time zones, voices tense and accusatory through the speakerphone. William Green led the prosecution. Unauthorized shutdown, false alarm, estimated losses exceed $90,000 in delayed production. Hayes had his narrative ready, polished and poisonous. This is exactly the kind of reactive, non-protocol behavior that makes night maintenance a liability. Jack acted on instinct, not data. Jennifer Martinez from Human Resources laid out the paperwork. Performance issue. Forms pre-populated with legal language ready for signatures. The machinery of termination grinding forward with bureaucratic efficiency. Sarah sat at the conference table staring at her bandaged wrist. She thought about this cabin, about hands making splints from scraps. She thought about the fire that had kept her alive and the fire that could have killed a dozen workers. She thought about the difference between data and truth. "I need 48 hours. Her voice cut through the arguments, silencing the room. "Safety investigation. Full review before any personnel action." Green's face went rigid. "With all due respect, Miss Reynolds, this is a clear—" "If we fire someone for preventing a disaster," Sarah interrupted, "and it turns out he was right, we'll face lawsuits that make today's losses look like pocket change." It was language they understood. Risk management, liability, mitigation. She was learning to speak their dialect while meaning something entirely different. The meeting adjourned with reluctant agreement to wait for the investigation results. Sarah remained at the table after everyone else had gone alone, with the weight of what had almost happened. What might still happen? That evening, she called her father, Chairman George Reynolds. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying that particular tone of disappointment he'd perfected over decades. "How's the inspection going?" Cutts identified. Sarah hesitated. "There was a safety incident today. I'm initiating a full review before proceeding with any terminations." Her father's sigh conveyed volumes. "Sarah, we've discussed this. Leadership means making hard choices. The board expects that 11% reduction by end of quarter. A man saved my life twice in 24 hours, and he's on the reduction list." Silence on the other end. "Then don't go soft." Sarah looked at the burn patterns on her jacket sleeve, at the medical report documenting Jack's injury. What if the hard choice is admitting we're wrong? Her father had no answer for that. The next morning, Jack submitted his resignation letter. 2 sentences on plant stationery. Effective immediately, I resign my position. I won't let anyone sacrifice their principles for my sake. He left it on Sarah's desk and walked out. With his meager severance, he might stretch finances for a month, maybe 6 weeks if he picked up extra delivery routes. Emily's medication would be the challenge. Without insurance, the cost would be crippling. Jack drove home rehearsing what he would tell his daughter. How he would explain that things would be tight for a while, that they might need to move, that changes were coming. She'd understand. She always did. That was the worst part. The trailer seemed smaller somehow, the walls pressing in. Jack sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands. The weight he'd been carrying for so long, suddenly too heavy to bear. His phone rang. Unknown number. Jack Miller. The voice on the other end belonged to Frank Thompson. She's looking for you, Reynolds. Tore through the maintenance records like a tornado, found the safety valve logs, the sensor purchase orders, all of it. Hayes is sweating bullets. Jack closed his eyes. Too little, too late. She's going to need your statement for the investigation. I gave my statement when I resigned. You didn't hear this from me, but there's more going on than a safety review. She's building a case against Hayes. Something about vendor kickbacks, falsified approval documents. Jack, this could change everything. Or it could be corporate theater. Reynolds still reports to the board. They still want their cuts. Come back in, just for the investigation. Help us make the case for maintenance. Jack thought of Emily, of her medication, of the promises he'd made to always be there. There were worse things than swallowing your pride. Fine, but I'm doing it for the team, not for her. After hanging up, Jack's gaze landed on Emily's drawing taped to the refrigerator. The crayon fireplace, bright orange flames against a blue background. Warm beats storm, written in her careful 7-year-old hand. He'd taught her that phrase during her first Montana winter, when the power had gone out and they'd huddled together under blankets telling stories to keep the cold at bay. It had become their mantra, their private philosophy. No matter how harsh the world outside, they would create warmth together. Now Jack had to find a way to keep that promise, even if it meant walking back into the storm. Sarah drove to Jack's address, a trailer park on the edge of town where rent was cheap and dignity was hard-won. The trailer was small but immaculate. Flower boxes in the windows, a satellite dish pointing toward stars. Emily answered the door, this tiny person with serious eyes and a gap-toothed smile. She was holding a drawing still wet with marker ink. The familiar fireplace and those 3 words, warm beats storm. Are you my dad's boss? Emily asked with the directness of children who haven't learned to lie yet. I am, Sarah said. Emily studied her for a long moment, then held out the drawing. He says warm always wins, even when the storm is really, really big. Sarah took the drawing with hands that weren't quite steady. She knelt down to Emily's level. Your dad is right. He's very right. Jack appeared behind his daughter, saw Sarah, started to close the door. But Sarah spoke first. I need you to come back, not to your old job, to lead the emergency systems restoration. Full protocol review. You write the new standards. Jack shook his head. I'm not interested in being anyone's token redemption. This isn't redemption, Sarah said. It's recognition. The plant needs someone who sees problems before sensors do. Someone who will hit the alarm even when it costs 6 figures. Someone who understands that numbers don't bleed. The words hung in the space between them. Emily looked from one adult to the other, sensing the importance of what was happening, but not fully understanding it. Jack's jaw worked as he struggled with conflicting impulses, pride, practicality, principle. Finally, he spoke. I'll need full access to the maintenance records. And a team I choose. You'll have it. Start tomorrow. Sarah turned to leave, then paused. She pulled the red flannel coat from her bag, held it out to Jack. Thank you. For everything. Keep it, Jack said. Storms aren't over yet. Sarah left with Emily's drawing clutched in her hand, feeling as if something fundamental had shifted in the company, in herself, in the world. The numbers and metrics that had guided her career suddenly seemed less substantial, less real than the crayon flames on the page. In her hotel room, she began preparing for the board meeting where she would have to justify her decisions, where she would have to explain why the 11% reduction target would not be met, at least not in the way they expected. Her father would be furious. Hayes and Green would fight her. The board might even replace her. But for the first time in her professional life, Sarah Reynolds was prepared to lose a battle in order to win the war. Because some things she was beginning to understand mattered more than efficiency, more than metrics, more than the appearance of strength. Some things were worth fighting for even if you stood alone, even if the storm seemed too powerful to survive. She looked at Emily's drawing at those three simple words, warm beats storm. And for the first time in a very long time, Sarah allowed herself to hope it might be true. Morning light streamed through the narrow windows of Sterling Dynamics conference room as Sarah Reynolds spread maintenance logs across the polished table. Dark circles beneath her eyes betrayed a sleepless night spent combing through years of safety reports, requisition forms, and inspection documents. The paper trail told a story that numbers alone couldn't capture a pattern of deferred maintenance, ignored warnings, and cost-cutting measures that had brought them to the brink of disaster. Jennifer Martinez entered it with the 2 cups of coffee, sliding one toward Sarah. "You've been at this since 4 a.m. Find what you needed." Sarah looked up, fatigue evident in the tight lines around her eyes. The safety valve Jack flagged 4 months ago, it wasn't just one report. There were 3 separate maintenance tickets, all marked critical by different technicians, all denied or deferred by Robert Hayes. Jennifer nodded slowly. "I remember those forms crossing my desk." Hayes said the executive committee had prioritized capital expenditures differently. The executive committee never saw these requests. "I checked the minutes of every meeting going back 6 months. They were buried before they reached us." The door opened and Jack Miller entered. His expression was guarded, shoulders tense beneath his work shirt, a man expecting disappointment. He carried a worn leather binder under one arm, stuffed with papers that threatened to spill out at the edges. Sarah's pulse quickened involuntarily. "You brought your records." Jack set the binder on the table, keeping his distance. "Everything I've documented since I started here. Anomalies, repair requests, workarounds. 3 years of trying to keep this place from falling apart with duct tape and overtime." He looked exhausted, probably hadn't slept since his resignation yesterday. The small burn on his forearm had been properly dressed, but he held it slightly away from his body, protective of the injury he wouldn't acknowledge. Sarah opened the binder, finding meticulously organized sections, handwritten notes in precise block letters, diagrams of systems with potential failure points highlighted in red. This level of detail was unexpected, not just maintenance reports, but comprehensive risk assessments. Work that went far beyond his job description. This is engineering-level analysis. Sarah flipped through pages documenting stress fractures in support beams, recalibration needs for aging machinery. "I was an engineer. Before." Jack's voice was flat, defensive. Sarah knew this from his file, of course. Jack Miller, Boeing's senior maintenance engineer with a track record of innovation in preventative systems. Resigned abruptly after his wife's death. The file didn't explain why someone with his qualifications was working night shift at a plant in rural Montana. Frank Thompson joined them, bringing additional records from the plant manager's office. The 4 of them formed an unlikely alliance: CEO, HR director, plant manager, and the mechanic who should have been fired. Frank's weathered face brightened slightly when he saw Jack's binder. "You still have the compression stress logs from last summer, the ones that showed microfractures developing in the east wall supports." Jack nodded, flipping to a tab section. "And the vibration analysis from when they installed the new cooling system without proper dampeners." Sarah watched the easy rapport between the 2 men, the shorthand of colleagues who respected each other's expertise. This was what her spreadsheets couldn't quantify: institutional knowledge, collaborative problem solving. The human infrastructure as vital as the physical one. Over the next 2 hours, they built a comprehensive picture of the plant's vulnerabilities. The safety valve that had nearly caused catastrophe was just one symptom of a systemic problem. Hayes had consistently prioritized short-term cost savings over necessary maintenance, creating a ticking time bomb of deferred repairs. Jack pulled up one more file on his phone. "The safety system I designed at Boeing, it monitored pressure variations and micro vibrations to predict failures before they happen. The company shelved it because the upfront cost was too high, even though it would have saved millions long term. If we had something similar here yesterday, wouldn't have happened." Sarah studied him, seeing not just the tired mechanic, but glimpses of the engineer he'd been. the passion that still burned despite everything life had thrown at him. Why did you leave Boeing? Jack's expression closed like a steel door. Personal reasons. The abrupt withdrawal was a warning territory he wouldn't discuss. Sarah changed direction. We need to prepare for the board meeting tomorrow. Hayes is already building his narrative that you overreacted, caused unnecessary downtime, that the explosion was minor and contained. Jack gathered his materials, shoulders tight with tension. What do you need from me? Documentation, testimony, and your engineering expertise to help build a case for an alternative approach. Fine. He checked his watch. I need to pick up my daughter from school. I'll be back in 2 hours. After Jack left, Jennifer turned to Sarah. Hayes is already lobbying board members, telling them you've gone soft, that you're letting emotions override business sense. Sarah's jaw tightened. He's also hiding something. His reactions yesterday were too extreme for a simple disagreement about protocol. Jennifer, I need you to pull every vendor contract Hayes has approved in the last 18 months. Frank, get me production reports showing actual maintenance costs versus projected. We need to follow the money. They dispersed to their tasks, leaving Sarah alone with Jack's meticulous records. She found herself lingering over a page where he'd sketched a more efficient safety relay system, the design elegant in its simplicity. In the margin, he'd written a note to himself, M's idea redundant circuit like her turbine backup. Emily, his daughter, the little girl with serious eyes and a gap-toothed smile who believed warm always wins. Sarah thought about her own childhood growing up in the shadow of Sterling Dynamics. Her father had taught her to see people as assets or liabilities, had taught her that leadership meant making the hard choices others wouldn't. What would George Reynolds think of her now, poring over maintenance logs instead of finalizing termination papers? Sarah's phone rang. Speak of the devil. Her father's name flashed on the screen. Have you resolved the situation? His tone made clear what resolution should look like. Sarah chose her words carefully. I'm conducting a thorough investigation before making any decisions. A heavy sigh traveled through the connection. The board meeting is tomorrow, Sarah. They're expecting results, not investigations. They'll get results, but they'll be based on complete information, not convenient narratives. You're sounding like an idealist. That's not the Reynolds way. Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. Maybe the Reynolds way needs to evolve. After ending the call, Sarah went to the window overlooking the production floor. 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, nearly 1,000 jobs, the economic backbone of Ridgemont. This wasn't just about corporate politics or personal redemption. Real lives hung in the balance. Her reflection stared back at her, superimposed over the workers below. Who was Sarah Reynolds now? The ice-cold CEO who made the hard choices? Or someone new, someone still taking shape? Jack returned as promised, this time with additional documentation, emails, warranty reports, repair histories. They worked into the evening, building the case piece by piece. At some point, someone ordered pizza. Coffee cups multiplied on the table. The formal hierarchy dissolved in the face of shared purpose. Frank pulled up historic production data showing how emergency repairs cost far more than scheduled maintenance. Jennifer discovered a pattern of vendor contracts awarded to companies with suspiciously similar corporate structures, all leading back to a holding company in Delaware. And Jack demonstrated how safety incidents had increased in direct proportion to maintenance budget cuts. Sarah kept her father's warning in mind. The board wouldn't be swayed by moral arguments alone. They needed hard numbers, undeniable evidence. A business case for doing the right thing? By midnight, they had it, a comprehensive report documenting not just the safety issues, but the financial implications. Hayes hadn't just endangered workers. He'd endangered the company's bottom line with short-sighted cuts that would cost millions to remedy. As the others gathered their things to leave, Sarah noticed Jack wincing as he lifted his binder. The burn on his arm bothered him more than he let on. You should have that looked at again. Her concerns surprised them both. It's fine, Jack's automatic dismissal of his own pain. Sarah hesitated, then spoke quietly. Thank you for coming back, for helping build this case. Jack paused at the door. I didn't do it for you. I did it for the people who work here, for the ones who can't afford to lose their jobs because some executive decided their safety wasn't cost-effective. The words stung, but Sarah couldn't argue with their truth. She had been that executive, had approved those same kinds of cuts at other facilities, had never questioned the human cost of efficiency. I know. That's why it matters. Jack left without responding, but something had shifted between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Sarah didn't go back to her hotel. Instead, she returned to her temporary office, preparing for the battle ahead. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. All members would be present, no remote attendance allowed. Her father would be watching, judging. Hayes and Green would fight to protect their positions, and Sarah would either save her career or sacrifice it, depending on how the chips fell. She thought again of Emily's drawing, warm beats storm, such a simple philosophy for such a complicated world. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the complications were what got in the way of doing what was right. Morning arrived with harsh fluorescent clarity. Sarah dressed in her armor, a charcoal suit, hair pulled back, severely minimal jewelry, the uniform of corporate authority. But in her briefcase, alongside the damning reports and financial projections, she carried Emily's drawing, a talisman of sorts, a reminder of why this fight mattered. The boardroom already hummed with tension when she arrived. 12 members seated around the massive table, her father at the head as chairman. Hayes and Green stood near the projection screen, a united front. Sarah took her place, arranging her materials with deliberate calm. George Reynolds called the meeting to order with practiced authority. We're here to discuss the Montana facility inspection and proposed workforce reductions. Sarah, you have the floor. Sarah rose, feeling every eye on her. Before I begin my formal presentation, I want to acknowledge yesterday's safety incident. What was reported as a minor valve failure was in fact a significant near miss that could have resulted in multiple casualties and millions in equipment damage. Hayes shifted uncomfortably. As we've already established, it was an overreaction by maintenance staff that, if I could finish, Sarah cut in. The subsequent investigation revealed a pattern of deferred maintenance, ignored safety warnings, and misallocated resources that created the conditions for failure. She activated the projection system, displaying the first of many documents, Jack's initial warning about valve C7 from 4 months earlier, followed by 2 additional notifications, all marked urgent, all denied. This valve had been flagged for replacement since August, not once but 3 times. Each request was denied or deferred. Yesterday it failed exactly as predicted. The next slide showed financial data comparing actual maintenance costs against projections, revealing a pattern of underinvestment followed by expensive emergency repairs. We've been cutting maintenance budgets to improve quarterly numbers, but the long-term costs are unsustainable. We're not saving money, we're just deferring expenses and compounding them. Board member Diane Carter leaned forward. What are you suggesting, Sarah? That we abandon the reduction targets altogether? I'm suggesting we recalibrate our approach. Sarah brought up the next slide, Jack's analysis of optimal maintenance staffing versus current levels. The night shift isn't overstaffed, it's critically understaffed for the aging infrastructure they're maintaining. We need a strategic reinvestment in preventative maintenance to avoid catastrophic failures. Hayes interjected, voice tight with controlled anger. With all due respect, Miss Reynolds, you're basing these conclusions on the word of a night mechanic with a personal agenda. The data shows exactly what I've presented, Sarah countered, and that night mechanic was a senior maintenance engineer at Boeing before joining Sterling Dynamics. His analysis has been independently verified by our own engineers. The boardroom fell silent at this revelation. Hayes hadn't known about Jack's background or had deliberately omitted it. Either way, his dismissive strategy had backfired. Sarah pressed her advantage. But there's more to this story than maintenance budgets. Her next slides revealed the suspicious vendor contracts, the Delaware holding company, the pattern of inflated costs and questionable bidding processes. In the last 18 months, Sterling Dynamics has paid over $3.2 million to vendors selected by Mr. Hayes, all linked to a single holding company. And in a rather remarkable coincidence, Mr. Hayes purchased a vacation home in Aspen 3 months after the largest of these contracts was awarded. Hayes's face drained of color. This is slander. You have no proof of any impropriety. Sarah placed a USB drive on the table. These files contain email correspondence between you and the principals of these companies discussing what they called consulting fees. I believe the SEC would find them quite interesting. The room erupted, board members talking over each other, Hayes protesting his innocence, Green trying to distance himself from the implications. George Reynolds slammed his hand on the table, restoring order. These are serious allegations that will require investigation, but they don't change the fundamental issue this company needs to reduce costs to remain competitive. Sarah met her father's gaze directly. I agree, but not by cutting the people who keep this company running, not by sacrificing safety for short-term gains. She brought up her final slide, a comprehensive reorganization plan. We can achieve the targeted savings through executive compensation restructuring, vendor contract renegotiation, and energy efficiency improvements. No layoffs required. The board members studied the proposal expressions, shifting from skepticism to consideration. The numbers were compelling savings equal to or greater than the original reduction plan, but achieved through different means. Diane Carter looked up from her tablet. This is surprisingly viable, but it would require significant changes to how we operate. Sarah nodded. Yes. Starting with how we value expertise over hierarchy, how we listen to the people who actually know our systems instead of just the ones with the right titles. George Reynolds' expression was unreadable. The board will need time to review this proposal thoroughly. In the meantime, Robert Hayes is suspended pending investigation into the vendor contracts. William Green will oversee operations until further notice. Hayes began to protest, but George silenced him with a look. That's all for today. We'll reconvene when the investigation is complete. As the meeting dispersed, Sarah gathered her materials, aware of her father approaching. She braced for criticism, for disappointment, for the cold assessment that had defined their relationship. Instead, George studied her with something new in his eyes. You put your career on the line today. You could have played it safe, implemented the cuts, moved on to your next promotion. I did what needed to be done. What was right? George nodded slowly. Your mother would have done the same. He'd never compared Sarah to her mother before Catherine Reynolds had died when Sarah was 14, a brilliant engineer whose innovations had built Sterling Dynamics, but whose warmth had built their family. After she was gone, George had retreated into cold efficiency, teaching Sarah to do the same. The comparison hit Sarah like a physical blow. Thank you. The words felt inadequate, but they were all she had. I'm still not convinced this soft approach will work. George's tone hardened slightly, retreating to familiar territory. But I'm willing to let you try. Don't make me regret it. He left without waiting for a response, straight-backed and dignified. Not a full endorsement, but from George Reynolds, it was the closest thing to approval Sarah had received in years. The hallway outside buzzed with whispered conversations as executives processed the morning's revelations. Sarah ignored them, heading for her temporary office. She had calls to make, a plant to reorganize, a new approach to implement. The real work was just beginning. Frank Thompson was waiting for her, practically vibrating with barely contained energy. They're saying Hayes is out, that there won't be cuts. Is it true Hayes is suspended? Sarah set her briefcase on the desk. The board is reviewing my alternative proposal. Nothing's official yet. Frank let out a low whistle. You pulled it off. Damned if you didn't actually pull it off. It's not finished. We still need to prove the new approach can work, that we can achieve the savings without layoffs. Frank's weathered face broke into a rare smile. Already started. Line 2 had its best production day in 3 years after Jack's team fixed those hydraulic fittings. Turns out machines work better when they're not held together with prayers and overtime. Speaking of Jack, Sarah tried to sound casual. Has he heard about the board meeting? Couldn't reach him. He took the day off to handle some personal business. Something about his daughter's doctor appointment. Sarah nodded, trying to ignore the irrational disappointment. Of course, Jack's priority would be Emily. That was who he was, a father first, everything else second. It was part of what made him different from the other engineers and executives she'd known, who sacrificed family time on the altar of career advancement, who measured their worth in promotions and stock options rather than in moments with the people they loved. Frank hesitated at the door. You know he's not going to come back as just a mechanic. Not with what he knows, what he can do. If you want to keep him, you'll need to offer him something more. I know. Left alone, Sarah sank into her chair, the adrenaline of the morning giving way to bone-deep exhaustion. She'd won this battle, but the war was far from over. The board would scrutinize every aspect of her alternative plan. Hayes might be gone, but his allies remained. And the fundamental challenge, making a 40-year-old plant competitive in a global market, hadn't changed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Press already calling about Hayes' suspension. Need statement ASAP. The corporate machinery never stopped. One crisis averted another demanding attention. Sarah began drafting a response careful to mention the investigation without making accusations that could lead to litigation. Precise language-controlled messaging, the tools of executive damage control. Halfway through, she stopped staring at the words on the screen. This was exactly the kind of corporate speak that created a distance between leadership and workers, the kind of careful non-communication that bred distrust. Sarah deleted the draft. Instead, she stood up, straightening her jacket. I'll address them directly. Plant floor 20 minutes. Jennifer's response came immediately. Not protocol or CEO. Exactly. Sarah Reynolds had never spoken directly to the plant workers before. That was what plant managers were for, what carefully scripted videos and quarterly newsletters accomplished. CEOs remained distant mythological figures whose decisions affected lives, but who never had to look those lives in the eye. Not this time. The announcement went out. All available personnel to gather on the main production floor at 2 p.m. Workers from all three shifts arrived, those off duty coming in specifically for the meeting. They stood in nervous clusters, theories and rumors passing from person to person. Nearly 800 people waiting to learn their fate. Sarah walked onto the elevated platform used for shift announcements. No notes, no teleprompter. Just a woman facing the people whose livelihoods rested in her hands. The hum of conversation died as she approached the microphone. Thank you all for being here. I know many of you came in on your time off, and I appreciate that. I'll be direct. This company planned to cut 11% of the workforce, primarily from maintenance and night shifts. That plan has been suspended. A ripple of reaction moved through the crowd, relief, disbelief, suspicion. Instead, we're implementing a new approach, one that recognizes your expertise and experience as assets, not expenses. One that prioritizes safety and quality alongside efficiency. COO Robert Hayes has been suspended pending investigation into financial irregularities. In his absence, we're restructuring operations to focus on preventative maintenance and sustainable practices. Sarah paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Some hopeful, some skeptical, all waiting for the other shoe to drop. They'd heard corporate promises before. Yesterday, this plant came close to a serious disaster. It was prevented because a member of our maintenance team trusted his experience over automated sensors, trusted his instincts enough to hit the emergency stop despite facing criticism and potential consequences. That kind of judgment, that kind of courage can't be measured on a spreadsheet, but it saved lives and equipment. Eyes shifted around the room searching for Jack, but he wasn't there. I owe all of you an apology. I came here with preconceptions about efficiency and modernization that didn't account for the reality of what you do every day. I was wrong, and I'm committed to doing better, to building systems around wisdom, not the other way around. The silence that followed felt weightless, suspended between past and future. Then from the back of the crowd, someone began to clap. Others joined in the sound building until it filled the cavernous space. Not wild cheering, these were people who'd been disappointed too many times for that, but something more profound. Acknowledgement, respect. Sarah let it wash over her, accepting both the gratitude and the implicit challenge. Words were easy, actions would be what mattered. As the crowd dispersed, Sarah noticed Frank speaking with a group of maintenance workers near the hydraulic station. She made her way through the production floor, still drawing curious glances from workers unused to seeing the CEO in their domain. Frank's face was grave when she reached him. Jack's daughter had her medical checkup today. Insurance is already showing as terminated in the system. They wouldn't proceed without full payment up front. Sarah's stomach dropped, but he resigned yesterday. Coverage should continue until the end of the month. Should, but doesn't. System processed his separation immediately. Standard procedure for voluntary separations with cause. Hayes, had to be. One final twist of the knife. How much was the appointment? Sarah was already reaching for her phone. Frank shook his head. It's not just the appointment, it's the medication, preventative treatments, follow-ups. Without insurance, we're talking thousands per month. Where is he now? Home, I guess. Trying to figure out how to keep his daughter healthy without losing their home. Sarah made a decision. Get me his address again and call HR. Tell them to reinstate his insurance retroactively. Create a new position. Safety Systems Director with full benefits, effective yesterday. Frank raised an eyebrow. That's not exactly protocol. I'm the CEO. I make the protocols. The drive to Jack's home took 15 minutes, the trailer park looking somehow smaller in daylight. Children played in the gravel spaces between units. Bicycles and chalk drawings, evidence of lives built within tight constraints. Sarah parked her rental car beside Jack's battered pickup, feeling conspicuously out of place in her business attire. She knocked on the door, the sound hollow against the thin metal. No answer. She tried again, louder this time. Finally, the door opened. Jack stood in the entrance, expression closing when he recognized her. Emily peered around his legs, curious about their visitor. Before Sarah could speak, Jack's words cut through the air. If you're here about the board meeting, I already heard. Congratulations on your win. The bitterness in his voice caught her off guard. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected. That's not why I'm here. Your insurance was terminated incorrectly. I've ordered it reinstated immediately, retroactive, to cover today's appointment. Jack's expression didn't soften. We don't need your charity. It's not charity. It's correction of an administrative error. And Sarah hesitated, then pushed forward. I'm here to offer you a position, Safety Systems Director, overseeing all maintenance protocols, reporting directly to me. Jack's laugh held no humor. So that's how corporate absolution works. Create a fancy title throw, money at the problem, ease your conscience. Emily tugged at her father's hand, sensing the tension, but not understanding its source. Daddy, who is she? Sarah knelt down, bringing herself to Emily's eye level. I'm Sarah. I work with your dad. I saw your drawing, the one about warm, beating storm. Emily's face brightened. Did it help you? Daddy says pictures help people remember important things. It helped me very much. In fact, it helped change how a whole company works. Sarah reached into her bag, withdrawing a folder. I brought you something too. It's the announcement for the regional science fair. Your wind turbine design qualified. Emily took the folder with reverent hands, eyes wide. Really? I get to go? Jack's jaw tightened. I don't know if we can... The entry fee has been covered, Sarah interjected. Sterling Dynamics is sponsoring all local students who qualified, along with transportation to the competition. It wasn't technically a lie. The program didn't exist yet, but it would by morning. Sarah would make sure of it. Emily looked up at her father, hope radiating from her face. Can we go, Daddy? Please. Jack's resistance visibly crumbled against his daughter's excitement. We'll see, Em. Why don't you go work on your presentation while I talk to Ms. Reynolds? Once Emily had disappeared into her room, Jack's expression hardened again. I don't need your help. Or your job offer? Yes, you do. Sarah kept her voice level. Emily needs consistent medical care, the kind that requires comprehensive insurance. And you need work that uses your actual skills, not just your hands. Jack's eyes narrowed. Why do you care? 3 days ago, you were ready to fire me. Now you're creating positions and sponsoring science fairs. What changed? You saved my life twice. And then you showed me how to save this company, maybe this whole town. Sarah met his gaze directly. I was wrong. About maintenance budgets, about efficiency metrics, about what matters. I'm trying to fix it, but I need your help. The silence stretched between them, taut with unspoken complications. Finally, Jack spoke. I'll consider the position, but I won't be a token or a trophy or whatever corporate redemption story you're writing for yourself. Fair enough. The job description and compensation package will be on your desk tomorrow. Review it, make changes if needed. This is a real position with real authority because we really need you. Jack nodded once, still guarded but no longer openly hostile. Is that all? Sarah hesitated. There was more, so much more she wanted to say. About the cabin, about the fire that had kept them alive, about the unexpected ways their paths had crossed. But this wasn't the time. Maybe there would never be a right time. For now, yes. As Sarah turned to leave, Emily reappeared, clutching her wind turbine model. Ms. Reynolds, wait, I want to show you how it works. Jack's expression softened at his daughter's enthusiasm. 5 minutes, Em. Then Ms. Reynolds needs to go. Sarah knelt again as Emily proudly demonstrated her creation, a surprisingly sophisticated design that adjusted blade pitch based on wind speed, maximizing energy collection even in variable conditions. I used Dad's broken drill parts for the gears, Emily explained, turning the small handle to show how the mechanism operated. And these are from an old toy car. Dad says good engineers use what they have, not what they wish they had. Sarah glanced up at Jack, catching a glimpse of pride breaking through his careful neutrality. Your dad is very wise. Emily nodded solemnly. He's the smartest person in the whole world, and the bravest. When Mom died, he said we'd find a way to make a new kind of family. Just us. And we did. The simple statement carried such weight, the tragedy of loss, the courage of beginning, again, the resilience of this small family unit who'd rebuilt from ruins. Sarah felt something twist in her chest, a recognition of something valuable she'd never possessed herself. I think your wind turbine has an excellent chance of winning. Sarah gently touched one of the blades. The world needs more engineers like you, Emily. As she stood to leave, Jack walked her to the door. Thank you for the science fair. Emily's been talking about it for weeks, but I wasn't sure how we'd manage it. It's the least I could do. Sarah paused at the threshold. The position is real, Jack. I meant what I said about needing your expertise. Think about it. Back in her rental car, Sarah watched the trailer through the windshield for a long moment. Such a small space to contain so much grief and joy, struggle and triumph, a father and daughter, building a life from whatever materials came to hand. Like Emily's wind turbine fashioned from broken parts, but designed to capture energy, to create power from the very forces that threatened to overwhelm. Sarah drove back to her hotel, mind racing with plans and possibilities. The board would expect a detailed implementation strategy for her alternative proposal. The press would need statements about Hayes' suspension. Operational transitions would have to be managed, expectations set, results delivered. But beneath all the corporate machinery, something had shifted. A fundamental recalibration of what mattered, of how success should be measured. For the first time in her career, Sarah Reynolds was defining leadership not by the tough choices she made, but by the human connection she preserved. In her hotel room, she placed Emily's drawing on the desk beside her laptop. 3 simple words in a child's handwriting: warm beats storm. As she began typing her implementation plan, Sarah wondered if maybe, just maybe, it was true. 3 months after the near disaster at Sterling Dynamics, the Montana plant hummed with renewed purpose. Fresh safety placards adorned walls, updated evacuation routes mapped in bright colors. The maintenance department had doubled in size with experienced technicians mentoring newer hires. Valve C7, the failure point that had nearly caused catastrophe, had been replaced with a state-of-the-art system that continuously monitored pressure fluctuations. But the most significant change wasn't physical infrastructure. It was the transformation in how decisions were made. Jack Miller stood in the control room reviewing data from the overnight shift on a newly installed monitoring system. The interface displayed real-time analytics from every critical component in the facility his design implemented over the past 12 weeks. The safety systems director position had evolved from offer to reality, with an office, a team, and most importantly, actual authority. When Jack raised concerns, now production stopped until those concerns were addressed. Frank Thompson entered, nodding toward the main display. 90 days without a safety incident. Best record in company history. Jack allowed himself a small smile. Systems working like it should. The overnight team caught that calibration drift in the east wing sensors before it became a problem. Frank's weathered face creased with satisfaction. The board's impressed. Stock price up 4% since the quarterly report highlighted our new safety protocols. Turns out not killing your workers is good for business. Who knew? The 2 men shared a moment of quiet vindication. 3 months earlier, they'd been fighting for the plant's survival against corporate indifference. Now they were being hailed as innovators, their approach becoming a model for other Sterling facilities. Jack checked his watch, nearly time for Emily's school pickup. His new position came with something he'd never had at Boeing: flexibility. 4 10-hour days instead of 5 8s, allowing him 1 weekday dedicated to Emily's activities and medical appointments. As he gathered his things to leave, Jennifer Martinez appeared in the doorway. Jack, glad I caught you. Sarah's coming in tomorrow for the quarterly review. She wants you to present the safety protocol results personally. Jack's expression remained neutral, but something shifted behind his eyes. He hadn't seen Sarah Reynolds since she'd visited his home 3 months ago, though they'd spoken by phone several times. The CEO had kept her distance, allowing him to implement his systems without micromanagement. He'd appreciated that and been puzzled by it. I'll have the presentation ready. What time? 9 a.m. main conference room. Jennifer hesitated. She's bringing her father. George Reynolds wants to see the changes himself. Jack nodded, absorbing this new complication. The chairman had been skeptical of the maintenance-focused approach from the beginning, despite ultimately supporting his daughter's play. His presence raised the stakes considerably. After Jennifer left, Frank let out a low whistle. George Reynolds doesn't leave headquarters for just at anything. Something's brewing. We've hit all our targets. Production's up, costs are down, safety metrics are the best they've ever been. Frank's expression remained dubious. Numbers are one thing. George Reynolds is old school. He wants to look a man in the eye, take his measure. Make sure this isn't some flash-in-the-pan success story that'll collapse once the spotlight moves on. Jack had faced tougher scrutiny before, but something about George Reynolds' involvement unsettled him. The chairman represented the old way of doing business, the philosophy that had nearly gotten people killed. If he wasn't convinced by the results so far, what would it take? The question lingered as Jack drove to Emily's school. The familiar routine of the pickup line gave him time to think. His life had transformed dramatically since that night in the blizzard. The new position came with better pay, comprehensive benefits for Emily's medical needs, and work that actually utilized his engineering expertise. The double shifts were history. He had time to help with homework, attend school events, be the father he'd promised himself he would be after Kate died. Emily bounded into the car, backpack clutched to her chest, eyes bright with excitement. Guess what? My wind turbine project was selected for the state science competition. Ms. Patel says I need to prepare a formal presentation with charts and everything. Jack's heart swelled with pride. He'd watched his daughter flourish these past months, her natural talents finding outlets through school programs that Sterling Dynamics now sponsored. The trailer park still felt small sometimes, but their life within it had expanded in ways he hadn't thought possible. That's amazing, Em. We'll work on your presentation this weekend. Get it perfect. Emily chattered happily about coefficients and blade angles as they drove home. Jack listened, still marveling at how her mind works so much, like Kate's finding elegant solutions to complex problems. At home, Emily spread her project materials across the kitchen table while Jack prepared dinner, a simple routine they'd perfected. He chopped vegetables for stir-fry, listening to Emily work through her presentation outline aloud. The small space felt different now. Not confining, but intimate sufficient theirs. Dad, why doesn't Ms. Reynolds visit anymore? She seemed nice when she came to our house. The question caught Jack off guard. I don't know, Em. She's very busy running the company, but she fixed your job and made it better. And she helped with my medicine and the science fair. Emily's logic is always cut straight through pretense. Are you friends? Jack considered his answer carefully. It's complicated. We work together. She's my boss. Emily gave him the particular look children reserve for adults who are being deliberately obtuse. Mom always said complicated just means you haven't figured it out yet. The invocation of Kate's wisdom filtered through a 7-year-old's memory stopped Jack cold. Kate had indeed said that usually when faced with an engineering problem that seemed insurmountable. Complicated wasn't an endpoint. It was simply a challenge waiting for a solution. Maybe you're right. Jack stirred the vegetables with more concentration than the task required. I just don't know what the solution is yet. Emily returned to her project, the matter settled in her mind if not in his. Jack finished making dinner, his thoughts drifting to Sarah Reynolds, the woman from the SUV, the CEO who'd challenged her board, the visitor who'd knelt on their worn carpet to admire Emily's wind turbine. Who was she really? And why did the question matter so much? Morning arrived with a sense of anticipation. Jack dressed with particular care, not a suit, but close, professional without pretension. The presentation he'd prepared highlighted the concrete results of the past 3 months. Safety metrics, production efficiencies, cost savings from preventative maintenance versus emergency repairs. Data-driven arguments for the approach he'd championed. He arrived at the plant early, reviewing his materials one final time. The conference room gradually filled with department heads and senior managers. Frank arrived, followed by Jennifer. Then Sarah Reynolds entered, looking much as she had the first time Jack had seen her in this room, poised, professional, commanding. But something had changed in how she carried herself. The ice had thawed, replaced by a confidence that didn't need to display its edges. Behind her came George Reynolds, tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with eyes that seemed to evaluate everything in terms of its usefulness. The resemblance to his daughter was striking, same sharp features, same evaluating gaze, but where Sarah had evolved toward warmth, George remained winter. The chairman shook hands around the table, his grip firm, his attention briefly but completely focused on each person before moving on. When he reached Jack, the scrutiny intensified. So you're Miller, the engineer who became a mechanic, who became a director. Quite a journey. Jack met the older man's gaze without flinching. Sometimes you have to step back to see the whole picture. A flicker of surprise crossed George's face, quickly concealed. Indeed, let's see if your picture is worth the investment my daughter has made in it. The meeting began with Sarah outlining the company-wide implications of the Montana plant's transformation. Productivity up 11%. Maintenance costs down 14% overall, despite increased staffing. Worker injuries reduced to near zero. Absenteeism plummeted. Even the metrics Robert Hayes had obsessed over, the cold calculations of efficiency and output, showed dramatic improvement. Then she turned the floor over to Jack. I'd like our safety systems director to walk us through the specific protocols that have created these results. Jack stood connecting his tablet to the projection system. For the next 30 minutes, he guided them through his comprehensive approach. The monitoring systems, the maintenance schedules, the cross-training programs that ensured knowledge sharing across shifts. He showed how preventative maintenance created predictable downtimes that could be scheduled around production needs rather than catastrophic failures that shut down lines without warning. How worker input had identified dozens of minor issues before they became major problems. Throughout, George Reynolds watched with an expression that revealed nothing. He asked occasional questions, precise, targeted, designed to test Jack's depth of knowledge and conviction. When the presentation concluded, George leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled before him. Impressive results, Mr. Miller, but sustainability is the true test. Will these improvements hold when the spotlight moves elsewhere? When budget pressures mount in leaner quarters? Jack didn't hesitate. The savings from prevented catastrophic failures more than offset the increased maintenance costs. This isn't charity or corporate social responsibility, it's sound business practice. But it requires long-term thinking, not quarterly shortcuts. The bluntness hung in the air, a direct challenge to the philosophy George himself had championed throughout his career. The room held its collective breath, waiting for the chairman's response. George studied Jack for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he smiled, a brief upward turn of his mouth that vanished almost immediately but was unmistakably genuine. I've been running companies for 40 years, Mr. Miller. Do you know what I've learned? That organizations like machines reveal their true character under stress. 3 months ago, this plant was on the verge of both mechanical and organizational failure. Now it leads our company in every metric that matters. He turned to Sarah. Your alternative approach has proven itself. The board has approved its implementation across all Sterling facilities. The tension in the room dissolved into murmurs of approval and relief. Frank caught Jack's eye across the table, giving him a subtle nod of congratulation. Sarah maintained her professional composure, but her eyes conveyed deeper satisfaction. The meeting concluded with assignments for expanding the Montana protocols to other plants. As people filed out, George Reynolds approached Jack directly. My daughter tells me you once designed a predictive maintenance system at Boeing that was shelved for cost reasons. Jack nodded, surprised she'd remembered that detail from their cabin conversation. A vibration analysis protocol that could identify failing components before they reached critical stress points. George considered this. Sterling Dynamics has an R&D division in Colorado. They're working on next-generation safety systems. Your expertise might be valuable there. Jack immediately understood the implication: a promotion, a transfer, a step back up the corporate ladder he'd abandoned years ago. Are you offering me a position? Exploring possibilities, George clarified. The Montana implementation phase is nearly complete. A man of your talents should look ahead to the next challenge. I appreciate the thought, but my life is here. My daughter's settled in school. Her medical care is established with local doctors. I'm not interested in relocating. George's expression revealed nothing, but Jack sensed disappointment or perhaps reassessment. Very well, it was merely a suggestion. After George left, Sarah approached. My father doesn't offer opportunities lightly. The R&D division is his particular pride. Jack gathered his presentation materials, keeping his hands busy to mask his discomfort. I meant what I said. My priority is Emily, not career advancement. Sarah nodded, accepting his answer without argument. Thank you for your presentation today. It made a significant impact. She turned to leave, then paused. By the way, I heard about Emily's wind turbine being selected for the state competition. Congratulations. The personal touch caught Jack off guard. She'd been tracking Emily's progress despite their minimal contact over the past months. Thank you. She's excited. A little nervous, too. She'll do wonderfully. Sarah hesitated, then added, if you need any resources for her presentation, engineering expertise materials, just let me know. With that, she was gone, leaving Jack with the distinct feeling that multiple conversations had occurred beneath the surface of their words. The CEO offering resources to an employee's child. The woman who'd spent a night sheltered by his fire reaching out across the professional distance between them. Later that afternoon, Jack received an email from George Reynolds' assistant, a formal offer to consult with the R&D division on implementing his safety protocols without relocating. The compensation was generous, the time commitment reasonable. A compromise that acknowledged Jack's priorities while still utilizing his expertise more broadly. Jack forwarded the email to Sarah with a simple question. You're doing. Her reply came minutes later. I merely suggested an alternative approach. The decision was his. Jack smiled at the echo of their earlier dynamics problems and solutions obstacles and workarounds. Maybe that's what defined their unusual connection, the shared understanding that there was always another way forward if you were willing to look for it. That evening, he helped Emily refine her presentation for the state competition, creating simple but effective visual aids to explain her wind turbine's innovative design. As they worked, he found himself thinking about Sarah's offer of resources. His daughter's project was good, excellent even, but access to professional engineering tools might elevate it further. Emily noticed his distraction. What's wrong, Dad? Don't you like my charts? Your charts are perfect. Jack refocused on the colorful diagrams spread before them. I was just thinking about something Mrs. Reynolds said today. Emily perked up at the mention of Sarah. She offered to help with my project, didn't she? I could tell by your face. Jack shook his head in amazement at his daughter's perceptiveness. Sometimes I think you can read minds. Emily giggled. Not minds, just you. Her expression grew more serious. Are you going to let her help us? It's your project, Em. What do you think? Emily considered the question with the grave deliberation of a child making an important decision. I think she's nice, and she knows about science stuff, and she has that pretty red coat you gave her. Out of all the possible reasons, Emily had focused on the coat, the flannel shirt Jack had wrapped around Sarah in the cabin, the garment she'd kept afterward. He hadn't realized Emily had noticed it during Sarah's brief visit to their home. That settles it then. Jack ruffled his daughter's hair. I'll ask her tomorrow. The next day, Jack sent a carefully worded email accepting Sarah's offer of assistance for Emily's project. The response came within hours, not just resources, but an invitation to use the company's engineering lab that weekend, when it would otherwise be empty. Saturday morning found Jack and Emily at Sterling Dynamics being greeted by Sarah herself rather than the lab technician they'd expected. She wore casual clothes, jeans, and a simple blouse, a striking contrast to her usual corporate attire. The red flannel coat hung over her arm. I thought you might want this back. Sarah held out the coat with a hint of awkwardness. It's been well used. Jack recognized his old shirt, now slightly worn at the cuffs, clearly a regular part of her wardrobe, rather than a forgotten memento. Something about that realization warmed him unexpectedly. Keep it. It looks better on you anyway. Emily, oblivious to the undercurrents, bounded forward with her project in hand. I brought my turbine. Can we test it in a real wind tunnel? Sarah knelt to examine the model, her focus immediately and completely on the child before her. That's exactly what I had in mind. And I've asked our lead wind engineer to join us. He's designed systems for wind farms across 3 states. The morning unfolded with a kind of magic as Emily's project was tested, refined, and enhanced with professional equipment. The company's wind engineer, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Patel, coincidentally the father of Emily's teacher, treated the 7-year-old's ideas with the same respect he'd give a colleague. Sarah moved between them, asking thoughtful questions, offering suggestions, her genuine interest in Emily's work evident in every interaction. Jack observed from a slight distance, struck by the transformation in Sarah. Gone was the Ice Queen CEO, replaced by someone warmer, more engaged, more present. The change wasn't just in how she presented herself, but in something fundamental, as if she'd reconnected with parts of herself long frozen. During a break while Dr. Patel ran some calculations, Sarah joined Jack by the observation window. Your daughter is remarkable. That variable pitch adjustment she designed intuitively, our engineers spent months developing something similar for the Wyoming wind farm project. She gets that from her mother. Kate could see solutions where everyone else just saw problems. Sarah glanced at him, curiosity evident but restrained. You don't talk about her much, your wife. Jack's instinct was to deflect to maintain the protective barrier around those memories. But something about this moment, the quiet lab Emily happily absorbed in her project, Sarah's genuine interest loosened his usual guardedness. She was an aerospace engineer. Brilliant. Could look at a failing system and diagnose the problem in minutes. We met at Boeing, worked on the same team. She loved the challenge, the constant innovation. What happened? Sarah's question was gentle, without demand. Jack watched Emily across the lab, so like her mother, in her focused concentration. Cancer. Rare type aggressive. By the time they caught it, it had already metastasized. 6 months from diagnosis to the end. I'm so sorry. Sarah's voice held no platitudes, just quiet understanding. I was climbing the corporate ladder, putting in 70-hour weeks. Jack's words came slowly, admissions he rarely voiced. She'd been tired for months. I thought it was just overwork. We both did. By the time she saw a doctor, he trailed off the familiar guilt of physical weight. Sarah didn't rush to fill the silence or offer empty reassurances. She simply stood with him in the moment, bearing witness. After Kate died, I couldn't stay. Couldn't face the same hallways, the same projects, the reminders of all the time I'd wasted chasing promotions instead of being with her. So I brought Emily here to my hometown, took whatever jobs I could find, promised myself I'd never miss another moment with my daughter for the sake of career advancement. Sarah nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. That's why you turned down my father's R&D offer. I built a life here. It's not glamorous, but it's ours. Emily has stability, friends, doctors who know her case. After everything she's been through, I won't uproot her for a better title or a bigger paycheck. Sarah's gaze shifted to Emily across the lab. The clarity of your priorities is refreshing. In my world, people sacrifice everything for the next rung on the ladder. Family health integrity. I've done it myself. Her candor surprised him. Why did you change course with the plant, with Hayes, with all of it? You were on track to implement those cuts. What really happened? Sarah considered the question, seeming to weigh her answer carefully. When you pulled me from that SUV, when you made that splint from scraps, when you tended that fire all night, you did it without calculation. Without weighing costs and benefits. She turned to face him directly. My entire career was built on calculations, on seeing people as assets or liabilities. Then you saved my life simply because I needed saving. It recalibrated something in me. The admission hung between them, honest and unvarnished. Jack saw in her face the same quality he'd glimpsed that night in the cabin, a vulnerability she kept carefully guarded, a capacity for warmth she rarely allowed herself to express. Before he could respond, Emily called from across the lab. Dad, Miss Reynolds, come see the modifications worked, the turbines generating 15% more power. The moment passed as they rejoined Emily and Dr. Patel, but something had changed, a barrier lowered, a connection strengthened. They spent the rest of the morning completing Emily's project, the atmosphere relaxed and collaborative. When they finished, Emily's wind turbine had evolved from promising concept to working prototype, complete with professional testing data to support her presentation. As they prepared to leave, Sarah handed Emily a small package wrapped in simple blue paper. A small token for your state competition. For luck. Emily tore open the wrapping to reveal a silver pendant in the shape of a wind turbine blade hanging from a delicate chain. It's beautiful, Emily immediately put it on the pendant, catching the light as she moved. Sarah smiled, genuinely pleased by the child's reaction. It's made from recycled aircraft aluminum. Seemed appropriate for a young engineer who knows how to repurpose materials. Jack watched the interaction with mixed emotions. Sarah's thoughtfulness touched him, but her ease with Emily stirred complicated feelings. This wasn't just professional courtesy anymore. This was personal involvement, crossing boundaries he'd carefully maintained. In the parking lot, Emily ran ahead to the truck, while Jack and Sarah lingered a moment longer. Thank you for today. Jack's gratitude was sincere despite his conflicted feelings. You didn't have to do all this. Sarah glanced toward Emily, now waiting impatiently by the pickup. She reminds me of myself at that age. before spreadsheets and quarterly targets became my world. I had a science project too, a solar water purification system. My mother helped me build it, won first place. The mention of her mother surprised Jack. Sarah rarely spoke of her family beyond her father. Your mother was an engineer, the best Sterling Dynamics ever had. Sarah's expression softened with memory. She designed the original pressure management system for our aerospace components, the one that's still used today 30 years later. What happened to her? Sarah's gaze turned distant. Cancer, when I was 14. The parallel struck Jack with physical force, both of them shaped by the same loss, though at different points in life. I didn't know. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Sarah refocused, professional demeanor returning like a shield. I hope Emily's presentation goes well. Let me know the results. She turned to leave, but Jack caught her arm gently. Sarah, the coffee offer still stands. Anytime. Their eyes met, acknowledgement passing between them of all that remained unsaid. Sarah nodded once, then walked to her car. As Jack drove home with Emily happily examining her new necklace, he felt oddly unsettled. The day had revealed sides of Sarah Reynolds he hadn't expected: warmth, thoughtfulness, personal history that paralleled his own in uncanny ways. The CEO, who'd once seemed the embodiment of corporate coldness, had shown herself to be something else entirely. Something more complex, more human, more familiar. The state science competition arrived 2 weeks later. Emily stood before the judges, confident and prepared, explaining her variable pitch wind turbine design with clarity beyond her years. Jack watched from the sidelines, heart swelling with pride at his daughter's poise. When the judges asked technical questions, she answered with precision, referring to the testing data from Sterling Dynamics' lab with professional authority. To Jack's surprise, Sarah slipped into the auditorium midway through Emily's presentation, taking a seat near the back, not drawing attention, simply there to witness. When Emily finished, the applause was enthusiastic, the judges visibly impressed. The results wouldn't be announced until that evening, giving participants time to view other projects and attend workshops throughout the day. Emily bounced from exhibit to exhibit, absorbing new ideas with insatiable curiosity. Jack followed, occasionally glancing back to where Sarah remained, observing, but not intruding. During a lunch break, Emily spotted Sarah and waved enthusiastically, pulling Jack toward her. Ms. Reynolds, you came. Did you see my presentation? The judges asked about the efficiency curves, and I showed them the data from Dr. Patel's tests. Sarah smiled, genuine pleasure lighting her features. I did see it. You were outstanding, Emily, completely professional. The engineers at my company could learn from your presentation skills. Emily beamed at the praise. Are you staying for the award ceremony? Sarah hesitated, glancing at Jack with an unspoken question. If it's all right with your father, I'd like to. Jack found himself nodding despite his lingering reservations. Of course. Emily would love to have you there. The afternoon passed in a blur of workshops and demonstrations. Emily participated in a renewable energy panel with students twice her age, her insights drawing appreciative nods from the moderator. Jack watched with the particular pride of a parent seeing their child shine, acutely aware of Sarah observing the same moments from nearby. As the award ceremony approached, Emily grew nervous, fidgeting with her wind turbine pendant. What if I don't win anything? There are so many amazing projects. Jack knelt to her level, straightening her slightly crooked name tag. Em, you've already won by being here, by creating something that works, that matters. The ribbon is just a bonus. Sarah, who had been giving them space, approached with uncharacteristic hesitation. May I add something? Emily nodded eagerly, always receptive to Sarah's input. Jack straightened, curious despite himself. Sarah knelt beside Emily, meeting her eye to eye. Do you know what makes a true engineer? It's not winning competitions. It's not even building perfect machines. She touched the wind turbine pendant gently. It's the ability to see a problem and believe you can solve it. To look at something broken and imagine it whole. You already have that gift, Emily. The judge's decision won't change that. Emily absorbed these words, her nervous fidgeting stilling. The simple wisdom seemed to reach her in a way Jack's reassurance hadn't. Thank you. I'll remember that. As they took their seats for the ceremony, Jack found himself studying Sarah with new eyes. She'd connected with Emily on a level he hadn't expected, not as an authority figure or even a mentor, but as someone who recognized a kindred spirit. The Elementary Division Awards began with honorable mentions, then third place. Emily squeezed Jack's hand as each name was called, her anticipation building. Second place went to a solar desalination project. Then the first place announcement came: Emily Miller and her variable pitch wind turbine. Emily's shriek of delight pierced the auditorium. She hugged Jack fiercely, then sprinted to the stage to accept her ribbon and certificate. Her acceptance speech was brief but heartfelt, thanking her father for never letting her give up her teacher, for encouraging her interests, and Ms. Reynolds and Dr. Patel for real engineering help. When she returned to her seat, she surprised both adults by hugging Sarah just as enthusiastically as she had Jack. The spontaneous gesture caught Sarah off guard, her composure briefly slipping to reveal genuine emotion before she recovered, returning the embrace with careful gentleness. After the ceremony, they celebrated with ice cream at a nearby diner. Emily, still bubbling with excitement, explained her project to the waitress, the cashier, and anyone else who showed the slightest interest. Jack and Sarah sat across from each other, watching her animation with shared amusement. "I think the entire state of Montana will know about variable pitch turbines by morning." Jack's voice carried the satisfied exhaustion of a parent after a long, successful day. Sarah smiled, twirling her spoon through melting ice cream. "She's extraordinary. You've done an amazing job with her." The compliment, simple and direct, warmed him unexpectedly. "She makes it easy. Hardest part is keeping up with her." A comfortable silence settled between them as Emily continued her enthusiastic explanations to neighboring tables. For the first time, Jack felt truly at ease in Sarah's presence, not as CEO and employee, not as rescuer and rescued, but simply as two people sharing in a child's joy. When Emily finally exhausted herself, head nodding despite her protests that she wasn't tired, Jack knew it was time to leave. Sarah walked with them to the parking lot, the night air crisp with approaching autumn. Emily gave Sarah one last hug before climbing into the truck, ribbon clutched proudly in her small fist. "Thank you for coming. It made it extra special." Sarah's expression softened in a way Jack had rarely witnessed. "I wouldn't have missed it for anything." As Emily settled in, Jack hesitated by the driver's door, feeling the weight of unspoken possibilities between them. "Would you like to join us for dinner sometime? Nothing formal, just a meal. The three of us." Sarah's surprise was visible, quickly replaced by something warmer, more tentative. "I'd like that very much." They exchanged a look that acknowledged this small but significant step, a personal invitation, a willing acceptance, the beginning of something neither had anticipated. As Jack drove home with Emily already asleep against the passenger door, her ribbon still clutched tight, he reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them here. A blizzard, a rescue, a corporate showdown, a scientific triumph. Moments that had changed trajectories, altered perspectives, created new possibilities. 3 days later, Sarah arrived at their trailer carrying a homemade apple pie and wearing the red flannel coat over a simple blouse and jeans. The domestic gesture seemed both incongruous and perfectly right, the CEO who had found her way back to something essential, something warm. Emily welcomed her with characteristic enthusiasm, immediately pulling her to see the ribbon displayed prominently above her desk and the new wind turbine improvements she was already planning. Jack moved around the kitchen, finishing dinner preparations, oddly comfortable with Sarah's presence in their small space. The meal was simple: roast chicken, vegetables from the community garden where Jack and Emily had a small plot. The conversation flowed naturally, ranging from Emily's school projects to plant operations to local Ridgemont history. None of the awkwardness Jack had half expected, none of the careful distance they'd maintained in professional settings. As they cleared dishes afterward, Emily yawned despite her best efforts to hide it. "Early bedtime tonight. You've had a big few days." Emily started to protest, then reconsidered. "Can Ms. Reynolds read me a story first?" The request startled both adults. Sarah recovered first, her response careful, leaving room for Jack's veto. "If your dad says it's okay, I'd be happy to." Jack nodded, touched by his daughter's inclusion of Sarah in their nightly ritual. "Sure, you go get ready, pick out a book." Emily disappeared into her small bedroom, leaving Jack and Sarah alone in the kitchen. Jack busied himself with the dishes, suddenly self-conscious about the domesticity of the scene. She doesn't usually invite people into her bedtime routine. It's been just the two of us for so long. Sarah leaned against the counter, watching him work. "I'm honored," she asked. "But if it's too much, too personal?" Jack shook his head. "No, it's good. You're important to her, to us. The admission hung in the air between them, simple but profound. Sarah's expression, softened vulnerability briefly visible before Emily reappeared in pajamas clutching a worn copy of A Wrinkle in Time. "I'm ready." She beckoned to Sarah, who followed her to the bedroom, leaving Jack to finish the dishes alone. Through the thin walls, he could hear Sarah's voice animated as she read about tesseracts and dimensional travel. Emily's occasional questions, the easy rapport between them. When Sarah emerged 20 minutes later, her expression was thoughtful. "She's asleep." Right in the middle of chapter 3, the multi-dimensional physics wore her out. Jack smiled, drying his hands on a kitchen towel. "She's been fascinated by that book since her teacher read it in class. Keeps asking me if we can build a tesseract in the garage." Sarah laughed softly, the sound natural and unguarded. Smart as she is, I wouldn't put it past her to figure it out. They moved to the small living room, the evening stretching before them with new possibility. Jack poured 2 mugs of coffee, and they settled on the couch close, but not touching the space between them, charged with unspoken awareness. "Thank you for dinner, for including me." Sarah's voice was quieter now, more personal. Jack studied her in the warm lamplight, this woman who had entered their lives through crisis and remained through choice. "You belong here." The words surprised even him with their certainty. Sarah met his gaze, searching for the truth behind the statement. "In this trailer, in Ridgemont, or in your lives?" "All of it." Jack set his mug down, turning slightly to face her more directly. "I don't know exactly what this is between us. It doesn't follow any pattern I recognize. CEO and employee, stranger and rescuer. Whatever labels might apply, they all feel insufficient." Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "We've seen each other at our most vulnerable and our most capable. It creates a connection that doesn't fit into conventional categories. So what do we do with that?" Jack's question hung between them, honest in its uncertainty. Sarah considered this, her usual decisive nature giving way to careful reflection. "I think we acknowledge it, we explore it slowly, without expectations or predetermined outcomes." She hesitated, then added, "I've spent my career making 5-year strategic plans, but some things can't be mapped in advance. Some things need to be discovered as you go." Jack thought about the night in the cabin, about Emily's words, "warm beats storm," about the journey that had brought them to this moment. Maybe that's the point, not having all the answers, just being willing to look for them together. Sarah's hand found his fingers, intertwining with natural ease. The gesture was simple but profound, a connection freely offered and accepted, a beginning rather than a conclusion. Outside, the Montana wind picked up, whistling around the corners of the trailer. But inside, warmth prevailed, not just physical comfort, but something deeper. The warmth of connection, of possibility, of a future taking shape one moment at a time. Emily's drawing hung on the refrigerator door, crayon flames bright against the blue background. Those 3 words capturing a truth both simple and profound. Warm beats storm. Not because storms weren't real or dangerous, but because warmth created together, tended carefully, shared freely, had the power to endure when the worst had passed. In that moment, Jack Miller believed it might be true.